3 days before my father's funeral, my brother walked into a bank with a piece of paper that was supposed to make everything I loved about our father disappear into his own pocket. I didn't find out until later that this is exactly what he did. At the time, I was standing in my father's kitchen holding a mug that still had his coffee stains dried into the bottom, trying to figure out how to plan a funeral for a man who had raised me alone since I was 6 years old. I had no idea that while I was picking out a casket and choosing which suit he'd be buried in, my own brother was 3 miles away, sitting across from a bank manager, smiling the smile he always used when he wanted something. My name is Renee Whitfield. I'm 34 years old. I work as a physical therapist in a small clinic outside Charlotte, North Carolina, and until 11 days ago, I thought my biggest problem in life was finding time to visit my father more often now that his heart wasn't what it used to be. Before I tell you everything that happened, let me know where you're watching from tonight, because I promise you, by the end of this story, you are not going to believe what my father did to protect me from beyond the grave. And you're definitely not going to believe what my brother did to try to stop him. I need to back up, because to understand why any of this happened, you have to understand who my father was and who my brother became. My father's name was Walter Whitfield. He was 71 years old when he died, and for 43 of those years, he worked as a machinist at a manufacturing plant that made parts for HVAC systems. He was not a rich man. He drove the same truck for 18 years. He wore the same brown jacket to every funeral, every wedding, every graduation, until the elbows wore through and my stepmother finally threw it away when he wasn't looking. But what my father lacked in money, he made up for in something that's harder to measure and, honestly, harder to find these days. He was fair. Painfully, stubbornly fair. He believed that if you worked for something, you deserved it, and if you didn't, you didn't. My mother left when I was 4, and my brother Dale was 7. She didn't leave quietly, either. She left with a man named Curtis who sold used cars 2 towns over, and she took the good silverware with her, which is a detail my father used to bring up whenever he wanted to make a joke that wasn't really a joke. He raised us alone for 2 years before he met Carol, the woman who would become my stepmother, and who I have called Mom for as long as I can remember, because she earned that title in every way that mattered. Dale never forgave our mother for leaving. I understood that. What I never understood was the way he turned that anger into something that pointed at everyone else instead of her. By the time Dale was 16, he had already been suspended from school twice for stealing from other students' lockers. By the time he was 20, he had gone through 3 jobs, each one ending the same way, with him swearing it wasn't his fault, that his boss was an idiot, that the coworkers were jealous of him. My father bylaid him out more times than I can count. Not with money, mostly, because Dad didn't have much of that to spare. He bylaid him out with time, with second chances, with long talks at the kitchen table that would end with Dad saying the same thing every time. "I'm not doing this because I think you deserve it, Dale. I'm doing this because you're my son and I love you. But love and deserving aren't the same thing, and someday you're going to have to understand the difference." Dale never understood the difference. Not once, not in 38 years. I want to be fair here, because even now, after everything, I don't want to make my brother into a cartoon villain. Dale could be charming. He could make you laugh so hard you forgot why you were annoyed at him 5 minutes earlier. He showed up for me during my divorce 4 years ago, drove 6 hours in one night when I called him crying, and sat on my porch with me until 3 in the morning without saying much of anything, just being there. That's the frustrating thing about Dale. He wasn't hollow. He wasn't incapable of love. He just never let it cost him anything. When our father's heart started failing 2 years ago, it was me who drove him to his cardiology appointments. It was me who learned how to read his medication schedule, who sat with him during the long hours in waiting rooms, who noticed when his color wasn't right and got him to the ER 40 minutes before what the doctor later told us could have been a fatal episode. Dale visited when it was convenient. He'd show up with a bag of oranges he picked up at a gas station, stay for 40 minutes, tell Dad how good he looked, and leave. I'm not saying this to make myself sound like a saint. I'm saying it because it matters for what comes later, because I was the one who actually knew our father in those last 2 years, and Dale was the one who assumed he still knew him from a decade ago, back when Dad was easier to fool. My father's health took a sharp turn in March. A second heart attack, smaller than the first but enough to put him in the hospital for 11 days. When he came home, something in him had shifted. He started talking about his affairs in a way he never had before, not morbidly, but practically the way you'd talk about scheduling an oil change. He asked me to come by on a Tuesday evening in April. Just me, no Dale, and he made me sit down at the kitchen table across from him, the same table where he used to have those long talks with my brother. "Renee," he said, "I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to trust me even if what I'm about to tell you doesn't make sense right away." I remember my stomach dropping because my father was not a man who spoke in riddles. He was direct. He said what he meant. "I've been to see a lawyer," he told me. "A good one, not the one Dale's been talking to." That was the first I'd heard that Dale had been talking to any lawyer at all, and the way my father said it, flat, careful, like he was choosing each word before he let it out, told me this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "What do you mean, the lawyer Dale's been talking to?" My father sighed and rubbed his hand over his face, the way he always did when he was about to say something he didn't want to say. "Your brother came to me about 6 months ago with some papers, power of attorney papers. Said it would make things easier on me, easier on everybody, if something happened to my health and I couldn't make decisions for myself. Said he'd talked to a lawyer friend of his who put it together for free, as a favor." "Did you sign it?" "I signed something," my father said, and there was a weight in his voice that I didn't understand yet. "I want you to know that up front, because your brother is going to tell people I signed it, and he won't be lying. I did sign a piece of paper he put in front of me back in October." I was tired that day. I'd just gotten back from a cardiology appointment, and I wasn't thinking as clearly as I should have been, and I trusted him because he's my son, and you don't expect your own child to hand you something you need to read 3 times before you sign it. I felt something cold settle into my chest. "Dad, what did you sign?" I didn't understand what I signed until 2 months later, when I finally sat down and read the whole thing carefully instead of just skimming it, he said. It wasn't a simple power of attorney for medical decisions. It was broader than that. Financial authority. Authority over the house, over my accounts, over decisions about the property, effective immediately, not contingent on me being incapacitated. Your brother built himself a door into everything I own, Renee, and he did it while I was tired and grieving my own mortality and not paying close enough attention. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was trying to process the idea that my brother, whatever his flaws, had done something this calculated. Because bailing on a job, borrowing money and not paying it back, disappearing when things got hard, that was the Dale I knew. This felt different. This felt like something with a plan behind it. Once I understood what I'd signed, my father continued, I didn't confront him. I want you to understand why. If I confronted him, he'd either lie his way out of it, or he'd get angry and it would turn into a fight that would follow me to the grave, and I didn't want that. I didn't want the last months of my life spent screaming at my son across this table. So instead, I went and saw a lawyer of my own. A woman named Patricia Nguyen, downtown, not affiliated with anybody your brother knows. And she helped me build something to protect what's actually mine to give, and to protect you. Dad. Let me finish, Renee, because I'm not going to have the strength to say all this twice. He reached across the table and took my hand, and his grip was still strong even though the rest of him had gotten so much frailer over the past year. The power of attorney Dale has is real. It's legally valid as far as it goes. It gives him certain authorities the moment I'm gone or incapacitated, and there's not much I can do to erase that document now without a fight that I don't have the energy left to win, and that would tear this family apart worse than it's already been torn. So I'm not going to erase it. I'm going to go around it. He explained it to me slowly, the way he used to explain how an engine worked when I was a teenager and pretending not to care. The power of attorney document, broad as it was, only covered assets that existed at the time of his death in his direct, traceable ownership. The house, the checking account, the modest retirement fund he'd built over 4 decades at the plant. What it didn't cover, because Dale didn't know it existed, was something my father had been building quietly for almost 15 years, something even I didn't fully understand yet. "There's a second thing," my father said. "Something your brother doesn't know about, and something I need you to find on your own after I'm gone, because if I tell you now and you carry that secret around while I'm dying, your brother will see it on your face. He's always been good at reading people when he wants something from them. So I'm not going to tell you what it is tonight. I'm going to tell you where to look, and I need you to trust that when the time comes, you'll understand everything." My hands were shaking by that point, and I remember asking him, almost pleading, why he couldn't just tell me right there at the table. "Because your brother has already proven he'll go looking through my things for an advantage," my father said, and there was real sadness in his voice, not anger. "And I need this to be safe until it's supposed to be found. Renee, listen to me. When I'm gone and it's quiet and you have a moment alone, go to the fishing cabin, not the house. The cabin on Miller's Creek, the one my father left me, the one where I taught you to cast a line when you were 7 years old. There's a metal box under the floorboard beneath the wood stove. You'll know it when you see it, because I put a mark on the board myself, years ago, so you'd recognize it. Everything you need is in that box." I asked him what was in it. He just squeezed my hand and said, "Something that took me 15 years to build, and something your brother will never be able to touch, because it doesn't exist anywhere he knows to look." That was the last real conversation I had with my father. He passed 6 weeks later, in his sleep, on a Thursday morning in late May, and Carol found him when she brought him his coffee. The doctors said his heart simply stopped, peacefully, without pain, which is the only mercy I've been able to hold on to in the weeks since. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday, and it was on the Friday before, 3 days before we buried my father, that I found out what my brother had already done. I got a call from Carol, my stepmother, her voice tight and strange in a way I'd never heard from her before. She told me Dale had gone to the bank that morning. Not with her, not with me. Alone, with a folder of documents, and he had used the power of attorney to freeze the joint account Carol shared with my father, moved a significant portion of the retirement funds into a new account in his own name, for safekeeping during the estate process, and had a locksmith scheduled to come change the locks on the house the following afternoon, for security purposes, while our father's body was still at the funeral home waiting to be dressed for his own burial. Carol had called me from the parking lot of the bank, shaking, because when she tried to ask the teller a question about her own joint account, she'd been told she no longer had authorization on it. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding my phone so hard my knuckles went white, staring at nothing, and feeling something in me go very cold and very still. Not the kind of anger that makes you scream. The kind that makes you quiet. The kind my father used to get right before he did something about a problem instead of just talking about it. I called Dale. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the television on in the background, some sports channel, like it was any other Friday. "Renee, hey," he said, casual, like nothing in the world was wrong. "You get the flowers ordered for Monday. I was thinking white lilies Dad always liked." "What did you do at the bank this morning, Dale?" There was a pause. A short one, but long enough that I knew he'd been expecting this call, maybe even rehearsing an answer for it. "I'm handling the estate stuff," he said, his voice shifting into something more clipped, more defensive. "Somebody has to, Renee. You've been so busy with the funeral arrangements, and I've got the power of attorney, so I figured I'd take care of the financial side while you handle the ceremony side. Divide and conquer. Carol says you locked her out of the joint account. Carol says you're changing the locks on the house tomorrow. That account has both their names on it, and technically, under the estate process, it needs to be secured until probate sorts out. Dad isn't even buried yet." "I know that," he snapped, and for the first time I heard something crack in his voice, something that sounded almost like guilt trying to disguise itself as irritation. "I know that, okay? You think I don't know that? I'm trying to protect this family's assets before things get messy, before lawyers start picking everything apart and taking their cut. I'm doing this for all of us." "You're doing this for you," I said. "You've always been doing things for you, Dale. You just call it something else." He hung up on me. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that, staring at the phone, and I thought about my father sitting across from me at that kitchen table 6 weeks earlier, telling me not to confront Dale, telling me he had already gone around the problem instead of fighting it head-on. And I thought about the cabin on Miller's Creek, and the metal box under the floorboard, and the mark my father said I would recognize. I didn't tell Carol about the cabin. I didn't tell anyone. I got in my car that Friday evening, 3 days before the funeral, and I drove the 2 hours north alone, the way my father had asked me to, because whatever was waiting for me in that box, I had a feeling it was the only thing standing between my brother and everything our father had spent his whole life building. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered it, the way places from childhood always do. The porch light didn't work anymore. The key was still hidden in the same fake rock by the steps. The paint on it faded and chipped. I let myself in, and the smell hit me immediately, old wood, dust, and underneath it, faintly, still, the smell of my father's pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked a pipe in over a decade. I found the wood stove exactly where I remembered it, and I knelt down in front of it with a flashlight from my car, running my hand along the floorboards until I found one with a small, deliberate scratch carved into the corner. A mark I recognized instantly, because it was the same symbol my father used to carve into the wooden lures he made for me when I was little, a simple curved line that looked almost like a fish hook. My hands were shaking as I pried the board loose. The metal box underneath was heavier than I expected, and when I lifted the lid, the first thing I saw sitting on top of a stack of papers was an envelope with my name written on it in my father's handwriting, the same slightly shaky handwriting from the last 2 years of his life. I sat down right there on the cold cabin floor, and I opened it. Renee, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means you did exactly what I asked, which tells me you still trust your old man even when he doesn't explain himself right away. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I made you drive all the way out to this cabin without telling you why. But I needed to know that whatever is in this box would only be found by someone who loved me enough to follow a strange instruction from a dying man, and not by someone who was already circling like a vulture. You'll understand what I mean by the time you finish reading everything in here. 15 years ago, right after your stepmother and I paid off this cabin, I sat down and did some math I probably should have done 20 years earlier. I realized that if I kept living the way I'd always lived, spending only what I needed, saving the rest, never telling a soul what I was doing with it, I could build something real by the time I was gone. Not a fortune. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want you thinking your old man was secretly some kind of millionaire hiding money in a fishing cabin like a character in a movie. But something real, something that would matter. I opened an account 15 years ago in a trust, managed by a firm 2 counties over, one your brother has never heard of and would never think to look for, because why would a machinist need a trust attorney in another county? I funded it slowly, a little every month, from overtime pay, from the sale of your grandfather's old truck, from a small settlement I never told either of you about after that back injury at the plant in 2011. I never touched it, not once, not even during the hardest years. Carol knows some of this, but not all of it, because I wanted this piece to come from me to you directly. The trust is worth just over $340,000 as of the last statement I received. It is entirely separate from the estate your brother has power of attorney over. It was never in my name alone. It has been held in the name of the Whitfield Family Trust since the day I created it, with Patricia Nguyen's firm as trustee and administrator, and it names you, and only you, as the sole beneficiary. I know what you're going to think when you read that. You're going to think it isn't fair to Dale. I thought about that for a long time, Renee, longer than you'd believe. But fair isn't the same as equal, and I raised you both to know the difference, even if only one of you actually learned it. I gave your brother chance after chance for 38 years. I gave him money I couldn't afford to give, forgiveness he never asked for sincerely, and trust he broke every single time. I don't regret loving him. I will love him until the last breath I take, wherever I am when I take it. But I am not going to reward the pattern of his whole life with the one thing I built that he can't undo through charm or excuse. I built this for the child who showed up. I built it for the child who drove me to appointments and read my medication bottles and sat with me in waiting rooms and never once asked me for anything in return. There's a second document in this box, sealed in a separate envelope. Don't open it unless you have to, meaning don't open it unless your brother tries to do exactly what I suspect he's going to try to do. Inside it, you'll find copies of bank statements, a signed and notarized letter from Patricia Nguyen documenting my mental competency on the day I signed the power of attorney and describing the circumstances under which your brother obtained it, and a written statement from me, recorded on video as well with Patricia as a witness, describing what I understood about that document and why I believe your brother pursued it in a way that was not honest with me. I hope you never need it. But if your brother tries to use that power of attorney to take more than what is legally his, or to hurt you or Carol in the process, that envelope will stop him. I love you, Renee. I'm proud of the woman you became, not because of anything I did, but because you decided, over and over, to be someone worth being proud of, even when it would have been easier not to. Take care of Carol. Try, if you can find it in yourself somewhere down the road, to still love your brother, even from a distance, even if he never becomes the man I hoped he would. And go fishing sometimes, not because you need to catch anything, just because I taught you how, and I'd like to think you'll still remember how it felt to sit quietly with me on that dock, not needing to say much of anything. Love, Dad. I sat on that cabin floor for a long time after I finished reading, long enough that the flashlight started to dim, and I had to shake it to keep the batteries going a little longer. I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the morning Carol called to tell me he was gone. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slow, steady release, like something that had been held too tight for too long finally letting go. Underneath the letter was exactly what he described. A folder from Nguyen and Associates, a boutique estate and trust firm based 2 counties over, with statements going back years, each one showing slow, steady deposits, small amounts that added up over a decade and a half into something I never in 1,000 years would have guessed my father was capable of building. There was a card with Patricia Nguyen's direct cell phone number written on the back in my father's handwriting, along with the words, "Call her before you do anything else. She's expecting you." And there was the second envelope, sealed, exactly as he described, with my name written across the front in block letters, the word conditional underlined twice beneath it. I didn't open it that night. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something about the way my father had written it, "Don't open it unless you have to," made me want to honor that instruction the same way I'd honored the one about the cabin. I put both envelopes back in the box, put the box in the trunk of my car, and drove home in the dark with my hands steady on the wheel for the first time in days. I called Patricia Nguyen the next morning, a Saturday, and she picked up on the second ring, which told me my father really had prepared her for this call. "Renee," she said, her voice calm and measured in a way that immediately made me trust her. "I'm so sorry about your father. He talked about you often. He was very proud of you." I asked her to explain everything, and she did, patiently, confirming everything the letter had said and adding details my father hadn't included. How he'd come to her 15 years ago after a friend recommended her. How he'd insisted on building the trust slowly and quietly specifically because he worried that if either of his children knew about it too early, it would change how they treated him, and he wanted to be loved for himself, not managed for his money. He was also very specific about protecting you legally, Patricia told me. About 6 weeks ago, when he came to see me after realizing what he'd signed for your brother, he was extremely concerned. Financial elder abuse is something we take very seriously in this practice, Renee, and while your father was still fully competent, he wanted documentation in place in case your brother attempted to misuse that power of attorney after his death, before probate could sort out the estate properly. I have a sworn, notarized statement from your father, along with video documentation, describing his understanding of what he'd signed and his belief that your brother obtained it through less than honest means. If your brother has already begun accessing accounts and changing locks the way you've described, we may need to move quickly. What does moving quickly look like? It looks like a phone call to the bank today, informing them that we have documentation calling into question the validity of the scope of that power of attorney, particularly regarding actions taken before the estate has gone through probate, she said. It may also mean a conversation with an attorney about a temporary restraining order preventing your brother from further access to joint accounts or the property, at least until a judge can review everything. I know this is a lot, especially 3 days before your father's funeral. I'm sorry the timing is what it is. But your father anticipated this exact possibility, Renee, and he built protections specifically so you wouldn't have to fight this fight without support. We spent that entire Saturday on the phone, back and forth, Patricia coordinating with the bank's legal department, explaining the situation, providing documentation of my father's competency, and the questionable circumstances of the original power of attorney signing. By Saturday evening, the bank had placed a hold on the account transfers Dale had initiated the day before, pending further review. The locksmith appointment, when Carol called to check, had somehow never actually been confirmed. The company had a scheduling error, they said, and needed to push it back a week, which felt like exactly the kind of small mercy my father might have appreciated, even though I know it was just ordinary bureaucratic luck. Dale called me Sunday morning, the day before the funeral, and I could hear in his voice immediately that he knew something had shifted, even if he didn't know exactly what. Why did the bank freeze the transfer? He demanded, no hello, no pretense of civility left in his voice at all. Renee, what did you do? I didn't do anything, Dale. Dad did. Dad's dead. I know, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. But he knew you, Dale. He knew exactly what you'd do, and he planned for it before you ever walked into that bank on Friday. There was a long silence on the line, and when Dale spoke again, his voice had lost some of its sharp edge, replaced by something closer to panic. What are you talking about? I told him. Not everything. I didn't mention the trust, not yet, because some part of me, even in that moment, wanted to give him one more chance to show me who he really was before I revealed everything Dad had built without him. I told him only that our father had documentation questioning the circumstances under which the power of attorney was signed, and that any further attempts to access accounts or change locks before probate would be treated as a legal matter, not a family disagreement. You're threatening me, Dale said. 3 days before we bury our own father, you're threatening me with lawyers. I'm not threatening you, Dale. I'm telling you what Dad already set in motion before he died, because he knew this is exactly what you'd try to do. He wasn't confused when he signed that paper in October. He trusted you, and then 2 months later, he sat down and read it carefully and understood exactly what you'd built for yourself, and instead of confronting you and having the fight of a lifetime while he was dying, he went around you. Quietly, legally, completely. Dale didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, in a voice that sounded almost like the brother I remembered from our childhood, before all the anger calcified into something harder, he said, "He really thought I'd do this, before I even did it." "Yeah," I said, "he did." Dale's voice cracked just slightly. That's kind of messed up, isn't it? That he knew his own son that well. I didn't have an answer for that, because it was true, and because some small part of me still ached for the boy Dale used to be, before our mother left, before the anger became the only language he really spoke fluently. We buried our father the next day, on a Monday morning in late May, under a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. Dale showed up in a dark suit, stood next to Carol and me at the graveside, and didn't say much of anything, which for Dale was its own kind of surrender. He didn't try anything else with the accounts. Whether that was because he genuinely felt shame, or simply because he understood the legal ground beneath him had shifted, and he'd lose any fight he tried to pick, I honestly couldn't tell you, and I've stopped trying to guess at my brother's motivations, because I've learned over the years that guessing at them only hurts me. 3 weeks after the funeral, once the initial dust had settled and probate had formally begun under Patricia's guidance, I opened the sealed envelope from the cabin. I hadn't needed to use it. Dale never pushed further than that first weekend, and the temporary hold on the accounts had been enough to make him back down entirely, whether out of guilt or fear of exposure, I still don't know. but I opened it anyway, because I needed to understand fully what my father had prepared, and because some part of me needed to hear his voice on that video recording one more time, needed to see his face explaining, calmly and clearly, exactly what he understood and exactly what he wanted protected. Watching that recording was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. My father, sitting in Patricia's office, looking tired but sharp, explaining in his own words how Dale had presented the power of attorney to him on a day when he'd just come from a difficult cardiology appointment, how Dale had rushed him through the signing, discouraged him from reading it carefully, told him it was just the basic stuff, Dad, nothing to worry about. Watching my father describe that betrayal so plainly, without anger, just sadness and clarity, broke something open in me that I'm still, months later, putting back together. The estate, the part Dale had power of attorney over, eventually settled the way it should have all along. The house sold. The proceeds split according to the actual while my father had filed with Patricia's firm, which named Dale and me as equal beneficiaries of that portion, because my father, even after everything, still wanted his son to have something. Dale got roughly $90,000 from that sale, along with half of the modest retirement account. It wasn't nothing. It also wasn't what he'd tried to grab for himself in that bank on that Friday morning. The trust, the $340,000 my father built quietly over 15 years, one careful deposit at a time, came to me in full, exactly as he intended, exactly as he'd written it. I want to tell you that, Dale, and I had some kind of movie ending, some big cathartic conversation where he apologized, and I forgave him, and we rebuilt everything that had been broken between us since we were kids. That's not what happened, and I think honesty matters more than a tidy bow on a story like this one. What happened instead was quieter and messier, and more true to real life. Dale and I talk maybe once every couple of months now, brief conversations, mostly logistics about Carol, about whether she needs anything, about the anniversary of Dad's death coming up. He's never mentioned the money again, not directly, though once on the phone in August, he said, almost in passing, I think about what he said, about the difference between love and deserving. I think I finally get it a little bit. Too late, probably, but I get it. I told him it wasn't too late. I don't know if I fully believed that when I said it, but I wanted to believe it, for his sake and for mine, because carrying that much anger toward my only brother for the rest of my life felt like its own kind of prison, and I'd already watched what unchecked resentment did to him for 38 years. I didn't want it to do the same to me. Carol still lives in the house. We used part of the estate proceeds to help her find something smaller and easier to manage, closer to her sister, and she's doing as well as anyone can a year after losing the love of their life. I visit her most Sundays. We talk about Dad a lot, about the small things, the way he hummed off-key while he worked on the truck, the way he always burned the first pancake and gave it to the dog like it was some kind of tradition instead of a mistake he never corrected. I still go to the cabin, too. More than I used to. I go alone sometimes, and I sit on the dock the way he taught me, not really trying to catch anything, just sitting quietly with the water and the memory of him, the way his letter asked me to. I replaced the floorboard by the wood stove, put it back exactly where it belonged, mark and all, because some part of me likes knowing it's there, empty now, but still holding the shape of what it once protected. Here's what I've come to understand. In the months since we buried my father, since I found that box beneath the floor of a cabin I hadn't visited in years. Love and fairness are not always the same thing, and choosing one over the other doesn't make you a bad parent, or a bad sibling, or a bad person. My father loved my brother until his last breath. He also refused to let that love blind him to 38 years of pattern, and he built something quiet and careful to make sure the person who actually showed up for him wasn't left with nothing simply because she wasn't the one causing problems. That's not revenge. It never felt like revenge, not once, not even in the moment I read that letter on the cabin floor with tears running down my face. It felt like being seen, fully and completely, by a man who spent the last 15 years of his life making sure I would be, long after he was gone. 3 days before we buried my father, my brother tried to take something that was never fully his to take. He didn't know that 11 years before he ever walked into that bank, Our father had already made sure it wouldn't work. And I think, if my dad is somewhere watching all of this unfold the way I hope he is, he's not smiling because his son failed. I think he's just quietly relieved that the daughter who showed up finally got to see, in black and white, exactly how much that showing up had always meant to him.